Hey, I'm here again. I've been wanting to do this video actually for a while. So just today though, I came to some realizations that I want to speak about. So it's been formulating in my mind for a while. So the root causes of narcissism in our society, in each other, in ourselves. So we need to look at what these root causes are and what may have developed them in a human being, in a person. And hi, Jane. A little bit about my history. So I was raised to be an elitist. I was raised by, this is going to sound really crazy, but I was raised in an elitist family, in a bloodline that required me to be an elitist, to perform at maximum level, to show up for my experience as a superhuman, rather than just being rewarded for my excellence. I was punished for not being more than perfect. And so this and I was also born and bred into this elitist family that literally told me that if I wasn't beyond the scope of the normal human realm, that there was something wrong with me. And so I was literally groomed to be a world leader. And I fortunately broke free from that. And I'm deeply grateful for that and for everything that I've learned in this process. However, I have been a narcissist my whole life. So I'm admitting that right here and right now, that I have had those attributes and those dynamics flowing and running through my experience since I was a child. And part of that was I had a mother who was a victim. So what's interesting is there are two sides to the pendulum, right? When you swing on one side, it's the arrogance, right, and the elitism. And then the other side of that pendulum is actually the victim consciousness, or being shy or timid. So we have both things going on. And what in alcoholism, in AA, they used to call that the arrogant doormat. It's like, I'm nothing but I'm all I think about, you know? So for me, that is how I was raised in a dysfunctional family. I'm going to close this window. So, hello, Black Op. Hi, guys. Oh my God, hilarious. So anyway, all of a sudden we have a flight path of Black Ops military that fly right by my window now. Fancy that. I don't know if that was the case before. However, I don't think that it was. So anyway, I have no reason to worry about that in my reality at this point. But it is funny that it happens while I'm doing videos. So, to speak to the root causes of narcissism. So in my experience, being raised an elitist, being raised to be larger than life, being raised to be this superstar, basically, and what was expected of me, I had to overcompensate constantly for my experience. I had to overcompensate and make it larger than life. I couldn't just have my experience and my feelings because that wasn't good enough. I had to actually fight to express my experience and for people to believe me, because I was being told that I was a liar, I was a pathological liar. So I was being set up literally to be a narcissist. I was being punished and oppressed and constantly told that whatever I was saying was bullshit and it was a lie, and that I held no weight. I had no, like, my words meant nothing, okay? And my words mean a lot. And I now understand the degree in which my impact affects reality. And I'm so grateful for that because I'm humbled by that. And because it's a responsibility that I hold and that I carry. And I have to own my shit. And so as a narcissist and as a doormat and as a caretaker and as a victim and as a rescuer, because I've played all those roles. We all have, okay? So what's interesting to me is a couple of dynamics that take place within the collective that I see happening right now, and I just want to speak to them. The dynamic of projection and blame. So a lot of times when someone makes a decision to take care of themselves on some level, the other person, whoever that person may be, makes them wrong for making that decision and accuses them or projects on them or blames them for them taking care of themselves and calls them selfish or says that they're the narcissist, right? So this is a typical behavior of a narcissist, is to blame the other person for being a narcissist, to call the other person selfish and do a reverse psychology on that person. So as a victim growing up and as a narcissist, I had both going on constantly. And I was constantly trying to find the balance within my experience of where do I exist? Like I'm either, you know, having to literally be a narcissist to survive because I was being pushed down and my light was being smashed, right? So I had to become the narcissist to survive. Like literally, living in Los Angeles for 20 years taught me how to be a narcissist. And I was already a narcissist, so that just added to the equation. And I had to dismantle all that programming when I left Los Angeles. So that's just an example of a place that can hold that frequency based on what it's about. So there are all kinds of factors and root causes for narcissism, right? And so this is a hotbed topic right now. Clearly it's a hotbed topic. People are projecting and blaming all over each other right now. Everybody's getting their feelings hurt. Everybody's trying to speak their truth, which I appreciate, people speaking their truth and like saying, hey, this is what's happening. And then I have the ability then to respond, the responsibility to share my take and my viewpoint of the same situation. And I don't have to agree with what that person is projecting onto me or blaming me for. I don't actually even have to agree with what their viewpoint is. However, I do need to honor and respect that they have their experience. Now that is the difference between being in right relations with our environment and in right relations with ourselves and in right relations with the people that we're interacting with. How I went about healing my own narcissism is I started to observe my thoughts. And of course I had 15 years solid, going to meetings every single day, twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day, sitting in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and looking at my shit and writing about it and journaling about it and processing the fuck out of my experience, which for me was incredibly important for me to process and hash it all out privately. Of course, I had some support, but predominantly I didn't really have the sponsorship that I craved or desired. So I needed to do all my shit myself. You know, I literally became my own sponsor. I became my own go-to source for wisdom and for what it is that I needed to heal. And it was really when I was willing to practice self-love techniques, and do esteemable acts that I started to heal that imbalance within me, of where I was a narcissist and where I was being told that I was a pathological liar. I may well have been a pathological fucking liar, but you know, the bottom line is I trust my experience now. So if anybody ever says to me, you're a fucking liar. You're full of shit. That doesn't really happen. That doesn't exist. I look at them and I say, and I'm sorry, how is it that you're an authority on my experience? It's my experience, right? So what I've learned is that I need to respect people who are having their experience. And that humbles me, because what I realize is every single person is having their own experience. Every single person is having the experience that they're having in that moment, and we all are having a different experience, right? So one person's experience is not any more valid than another person's experience, right? And so to honor with love and grace the people that we're interacting with and holding space for them, regardless of whether or not we agree or not, is important, right? So what ends up happening a lot of times with narcissistic relationships, or being in relationship with a narcissistic person, is that narcissistic person is actually, it's their inner child that is screaming to be heard and overcompensating for their insecurity and really trying to understand how to navigate the world. And so they have to overachieve, they have to overact, they have to overdo everything else, right? In order to find balance, right? It's like if someone was to cut themselves to feel. It's kind of the same thing, but not exactly, but it's like, it's an addiction almost, in that people don't even understand how they're programmed to function in this way. So I was programmed to function as a narcissist. I was programmed to function as an overachiever. I was but nothing was ever good enough, mind you. And I was programmed to be an elitist. I was programmed to be a world leader. I was programmed to be a superstar in Hollywood. And I literally had to break through all of those programs to find myself. And I'm not saying I have found myself, but what I am saying is I know where my triggers are now, and I know what they look like. So when they come up for me, I have an opportunity to address them straight up, right? I have an opportunity to look at my thought forms and how they're affecting my reality. And then I have an informed decision that I can make, and I have a choice, right? And so that for me is a really strong directive, is when I can step out of myself just enough to be able to observe my behavior. But that came from me getting my ass kicked and being beaten to a pulp, and people attacking me and me becoming the victim, and then having to overcompensate to survive and become the narcissist even more just to battle. You know what I mean? So it's like there's this battle going on between people right now that I'm witnessing, where they're just screaming to be heard. They really just want to speak their truth. And it's time for that. So what we can do, or what I'm personally doing, is I'm not assuming in any way, shape, or form that that person is wrong, or that that person is trying to make me wrong, which it could very well appear like they're making me wrong, right? So what's interesting about that is that if I am wrong, then I'm wrong. And I'll look at that. I'll look at whatever it is. However, it's important that we look at these things within ourselves, because at the end of the day, we are all pretty much narcissists on one level or another. Whether we are a doormat, whether we are a victim, whether we are a caretaker, in some form or another, we are self-involved, okay? The society that we live in is breeding self-involvement. It's not like we are an exception and everybody else is the narcissist. No, we are all responsible for ourselves on all levels, right? And until we take responsibility for our own part in our own narcissism, we will not be able to heal ourselves or anyone else from the narcissistic personality disorder, if you will, that is establishing itself in our society at this time. We are being bred to be narcissists. Now, here's another piece that maybe, oh, by the way, Carolyn, if you listen from the beginning, you'll get that piece of information. Okay, so here's a piece that I want to bring in that a lot of people don't think about, and that is the disembodied energies, or the interdimensional beings that are actually hosting humans, right? That cause the narcissistic personality to flare up and to be present. And most people have no idea that they're hosted. Most people don't have any clue, right, that they are dealing with a narcissistic personality, because they're under mind control from the interdimensional beings that are influencing their reality, okay? So this is where it gets complicated, because people want to blame the narcissist. People want to project onto the narcissist. But when we look at ourselves projecting, what are we projecting, right? If we point a finger, we're pointing 3 back at ourselves. So if we can step out of that long enough, to look at our own behaviors, but also to just step back and look from the heart and say, what is this person really saying? Is this person crying out for love? Like, what are they doing exactly? And chances are you will see that there's something in their field energetically that is amiss, that is out of alignment, and that is causing the influence of the behavioral patterns that are revealing themselves within this situation. And so in my experience, because I work with people all the time, I'm constantly dealing with narcissistic personalities in life. But also, it's interesting because you can support the narcissist, right? And nobody's supporting the narcissist. They're just pointing their finger and blaming. And that's not the solution that we need to be in right now, that I need to be in. My personal take is that if we don't heal the narcissistic personality traits by looking at our own, and because all of us have a sphere of influence, right? All of us have the capacity to affect multidimensional layers of reality. So if we're pointing the finger and blaming someone else, but we're not willing to look at our own shit, and we're not owning our own shit, then we're participating and enabling the narcissistic personality to completely continue to just run rampant in our society, period. And so enough of that already. Seriously, like, we're done with that, okay? Now, in my opinion, and I'm having a very strong opinion about this because I was a narcissist and I am at times. I see myself operating as a narcissist on occasion when I go into survival mode or I have some level of fear or whatever. I will literally go into narcissism to survive. I will overcompensate for my experience and become larger than life just to survive, okay? It hasn't happened to me in a long time, so I'm really grateful for that. But every day of my experience as a child, I was told that I was a liar, that my words weren't valid. They didn't hold any weight, right? And that I was basically a pathological liar. And here I am having this like huge fucking experience, right? Huge experience. So what did I have to do? I had to become bigger. I had to become bigger, larger than life, to be noticed, to be seen, to be heard. And when I wasn't heard, I'd start screaming, and that was the childhood I had. I mean, that's what I grew up in. I grew in fighting to survive, like literally fighting to be heard and to be witnessed and to shine, to naturally shine. I was oppressed and pushed down, and I've already repeated this. I've said it earlier, but for the people that just came on, I want to kind of explain that I consider myself a narcissist on some level, or that I was at one point a narcissist. And now, I've learned to look at my own shit in order to be able to really understand the narcissist and understand my own involvement in narcissistic personality traits. And because of my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous and looking at my part in every single situation for 15 years, I mean, longer, because I'm 23 years sober, but, you know, like, the practice of looking at my shit every 5 seconds, and being discerning and looking at all levels of my consciousness and every single thought form that went through my fucking brain, you know, I learned that I couldn't blame the narcissist if I wasn't taking responsibility for my own part in the situation where, one, I was abandoning myself, two, I was being dishonest with myself and others, and three, I was in total fear, right? So if I wasn't addressing those things, right, then I couldn't speak to the other person because the other person was literally doing the same thing I was doing. So it was like two narcissists just going at each other, you know? So what I find is happening, and what I'm witnessing in a lot of people right now, is that there's a narcissistic sort of personality trait that is being attacked by others who actually are playing the victim. And until the victim is willing to look at their role and their part in the situation, they will continue to perpetrate the victim consciousness within the relationship, within the dynamic of the situation, and they will never cause healing within the situation itself because they're not willing to look at their own part. They're only willing to project onto the narcissist, right? But the narcissist will never heal or want to heal until they are shown compassion, unconditional love, and grace. You know, I've worked with so many narcissists, and I've worked with so many people that had a victim consciousness, and not just in my sessions, but just in life. And I've I guess work is not the right word. I've interacted with so many different types of people. Self-awareness comes from when someone else gives you the opportunity to look at yourself, right? And so that is something that we can all do for a narcissist. And we can also look at our own part in our own self-awareness and our own self-interest and how we're showing up in our own life as a narcissist. And when we find compassion for the narcissist and we understand that the inner child within that person is really crying out for help and for love, and they're just overcompensating for the fact that they feel completely insecure and out of control, right? Or they're being hosted, so that's a whole different thing, right? There's the hosting aspect, but there are narcissists that are not hosted, that are literally programmed and designed to, they're programmed and designed to be narcissist, and they don't know anything different. So compassion, right? And we can express compassion, but we also, if we do the work ourselves and take ourselves out of the role of victim, and we take personal self-responsibility for our part in the dynamic that's playing itself out, we will probably stop enabling the narcissist to be narcissistic. And we will find ways to honor that person in their narcissism and give them unconditional love, not tolerance, but unconditional love, patience, kindness, you know, what they're actually asking for, you know. And then there's the vampiric aspect of it that is on a totally different level. So in terms of the society that we live in today, I truly believe that there are dynamics going on within our society that have been placed into our society that we didn't create ourselves. And we're being programmed to act in a very specific way. And so that programming is part of the narcissistic personality. And so it's playing itself out on two ends of the spectrum, which is the arrogance and the doormat, right? The victim and the narcissist, right? But then there's the rescuer, right? So the narcissist is like the villain, right? The victim, villain, rescuer dynamic in the dysfunctional family dynamics of alcoholic families plays itself out, and each person will take on the role of either the victim, villain, or the rescuer within any situation that presents itself within the dysfunctional family dynamic. So if we don't heal that in ourselves and we don't recognize how we're playing out those roles, then we can't help a narcissist and we can't help ourselves, because technically speaking, if we're still playing out those dynamics, we are a narcissist. And so when we look at how we are playing roles within our own life as a victim or as a villain or as rescuing someone else, we're still playing out the narcissistic dynamic. So then there's the aspect of the hosting, right? So I know I'm going around in circles, but there's a point to the reason why I keep repeating myself and talking about these things, because it is so important for us to recognize the narcissistic personality traits within ourselves, okay? And how the root causes created themselves there. How did they get there? 1, we had narcissistic parents. 2, we had alcoholic parents. 3, we had victim parents or martyr parents. So our first recognition of life, right? Our first relationship is our mother and our father, okay? Our parental units, right? Until we establish an adult-to-adult relationship with our parental units, right, that brought us in, our family of origin, until we establish a dynamic of adult-to-adult, we're still operating under child-parent dynamics, which then victimizes us to the influences of those parents. Those parents may be incredibly toxic people, right? Which then in turn makes us toxic. So it's like, there's no blame here. It's just recognizing and acknowledging that the toxicity exists so that we can do something about it. Does that make sense? So it's like, if we recognize that we are participating in a toxic, dysfunctional dynamic, then it gives us the opportunity to step back a little and to be able to recognize where we are playing out that dynamic within ourselves, right? A lot of narcissists will attack. They think that they're just being them and they're just, everyone is beneath them, quite frankly. Because they were programmed to believe that they had the answers or that they were meant to be leaders or whatever. That elitism programming is running in the collective, specifically in America. It's running in the collective across the world, but predominantly in first world countries and civilization, it's very prevalent, right? So, excuse me, and I'm specifically speaking to Americans right now, in that they post-World War II, they set up the Consumerism Programming and the dynamic of, you can go after your dreams and get whatever you want, but you have to succeed and you have to be larger than life and you have to be the best at whatever you do and you can have all the toys, right? And that dynamic has played itself out now to the degree that we have generations of people who don't take any personal responsibility for anything at all, ever, and their parents give them whatever they want because they don't know how to handle these children. They don't know how to handle being a parent because they were not parented, okay? So there's that toxic dynamic that's just repeating itself, right? And the depopulation agenda is in there. Boom. So the narcissistic dynamic of push-pull, sucking and feeding off of each other and blaming and projecting, that's all the root causes of all of that is coming from the core essence of a personal sense of separation from spirit. Bottom line, when we feel separate from and we don't feel a part of, that core sense that we are not like anyone else, that we are not just, you know, living in community and we're having an experience. So, like, for instance, people that grow up in community situations, for example, I've met several of them, they have a very different way of looking at the world than we do. Because they were raised by 10 parents, you know, and so they had the opportunity to witness community and to witness all these different takes on life. So they got a well-rounded perspective of all these different personalities that were available to them during their childhood, right? And different people caring for them in different ways. So they weren't stuck in the single family, you know, dynamic that trapped them in this framework of thinking, right? Which was placed upon us, right? Through mind control, through consumerism, through impulse shopping, through, you know, elitism that's being plugged into the collective every single day, right? Being a superstar. You know, so all of these dynamics were created by a dysfunctional, broken system that then was plugged into our society and plugged into the single family unit and into our churches and into our schools. And basically they, meaning the powers that were, have had the opportunity to control the outcome of our society. And the cool thing is that it actually served to wake us up. And so now we're woke as fuck. We're awake. We know what's going on. We can see that there's an influence other than God, goddess's hand in this dynamic that we're living in, this framework of the Matrix. And so now it's about not pointing the finger, but like being in the solution of okay, I'm going to take personal responsibility for my part in any relationship that I bring, any interaction that I'm in. I'm going to take personal responsibility for my role in that. And if I'm accused of being narcissistic or I'm accused of being whatever, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to take full responsibility for what is being gifted to me to perceive, right? And I'm going to make sure that I'm in full resonance with that. And if I don't agree with it, that's okay. Because I'm going to have my own personal experience, just like the other person. So honoring that other person is having that experience is important. It doesn't mean that we need to adopt it. It doesn't mean that we are a victim to it. Quite the opposite. It means that person needs help. That person actually needs support. And so I needed a lot of support when I was a narcissist and I was an alcoholic. Tons. And I still do. And so it's like those, but at the time I didn't think I needed help. I thought that I was like, you know, the cat's meow. I was a superstar, you know, and I wasn't. Not even fucking close, right? But I was in Hollywood and I thought I was all that. And it wasn't until I got my ass kicked enough times that I could see the hand of spirit working in my life, and I was processing the shit out of my experience through the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and being able to look at my part in every single thought form that I was having, that I was able to process enough to find the root causes of my own narcissistic personality and my own dynamic that kept showing up in my life that was causing me suffering. Right? It was causing me pain. And then also I was hurting others, you know? And so, you know, I imagine that most people really don't want to hurt anybody. And when they come back to their core personality and their core essence of their heart-centered intelligence, they're really not that at all. They're human. And so the inner child in them is rearing its ugly head and really, really needs attention. And so it's more about us recognizing that that's what's going on so that we can support the dynamic of them unraveling that and coming back into their own centered beingness and being able to reparent themselves and giving them an opportunity to have a new experience, right? Because they don't know. They don't even know what tools they need. They have no clue. They think they're just living their life and that everybody thinks the way that they think, right? I mean, I used to think that, and it's so not true. Everyone has their experience, and we need to honor that each person's having their experience. So by us becoming the example and not being willing to take on somebody else's projections, and also not being willing to project onto the narcissist, but really looking at them as someone who needs support. It gives us an opportunity to have a different perspective that's a little bit more objective and not so subjective, because we're not playing the victim role anymore, which is part of that victim, villain, rescuer, dysfunctional dynamic that comes from the single family unit. So I guess where I'm going with this is to say that we can all heal from this dysfunctional dynamic that is playing itself out in our society. We can all heal in our hearts from the damage that's been done to us or that we've done to others around this dysfunctional dynamic, right? We don't have to live with this dynamic anymore. We're all awake. We all have the opportunity to make personal choices right now that will shift us out of that dynamic as a society, as a collective, so that we have the opportunity to really look at ourselves and to look at each other with compassion and with our hearts. Because that's the only way that I see that we're going to be able to heal this. And I'm just speaking my own personal whatever. I mean, take it or leave it. Honestly, this is just my experience of being a narcissist and being a victim, and having both of those dynamics play themselves out in my life. So, and I wouldn't say I'm 100% healed from it at all, but I would say that I'm able to recognize those traits within myself and to work on them and to look at them. And I'm able to recognize those traits in others and to see that that's actually their inner child really asking for help, you know. And a lot of us are very skilled at listening and holding space and having compassion. But it doesn't mean, again, repeating, it doesn't mean tolerant. It doesn't mean tolerating bad behavior. What it means is diffusing the bomb, right? Diffusing the bomb and saying, I'm sorry that you feel that way. You know, I acknowledge that you feel this. I hear that you're feeling this, right? I hear that you are experiencing it in this fashion. But it doesn't mean that you have to take on the projections and the blame from others. And so it's so important for us to look at our part in everything so that we can be in right relations with ourselves and with that other person, so we can come from a place of compassion and love when that person is really upset, you know. Whether we be the one that's upset or the other person be the one that's upset, being able to witness that person in their experience and love them through it, because we know we've been there ourselves, right? And when we do our own work and we look at our own shit and we get quiet and we look at all the different things that somebody's saying to us, you know, and we hear them and we acknowledge them so that they are being heard, right? And we respect that they're having their experience. Then what happens in our own lives is we begin to have that experience where people respect our experience. And people respect that what we're saying is because we respect our own experience. And we start honoring our own experience, and we don't necessarily place the blame upon anyone else. We are willing to look at all sides of the equation rather than just how we're experiencing it or how we're feeling it and what that person is doing to us, because that's a victim narcissistic personality disorder trait, whatever. So last thing is to say that moving forward as a collective, dealing with this dynamic within the collective that is revealing itself to be healed, we can pray for the veils to be lifted for those people that are demonstrating narcissistic personality traits, and that they can then see their own reflection. That is just something that came to me today, and I felt to share that. Just to say that, you know, I choose not to be a narcissist anymore, but there's, you know, that doesn't mean I'm not narcissistic. What happened for me is I began to, so how it shows up for me is when I go into survival mode, when I'm in fear or when I'm under attack, supposedly, it's because, so I will overcompensate and become narcissistic to survive. So that is something that's happening for a lot of people that feel out of control right now. And so we need to be able to see that and be like, oh, wait a minute, there's another layer here. Let's look at the layer. It's not all about us. What is this person actually experiencing right now? Can we have compassion for them? Maybe they're in pain. Maybe they're hurting. Maybe they're just trying to survive, right? And this is the only way that, the only tools that they have, the only way that they know how to show up is to do it like this, you know, to overcompensate in their experience, to become larger than life, to take up space on the planet, right? That's the other thing, is like a lot of narcissists are actually battling to take up space on the planet within themselves because they don't believe that they deserve to take up space. So they overcompensate for that, and they take up a lot of space, and they blame anybody else in their environment that's not in alignment with their thinking process, right? And so the only way that I have found to diffuse that bomb is through unconditional love and respecting that that person is having their experience. Because when they feel heard and when they feel loved and when they feel respected, they have no reason to fight. So when I see that personality playing itself out, it's because, one, they're in some addictive, you know, dynamic within themselves, or addictive patterns. The narcissistic personality is an addictive pattern in my experience of it, just in my experience of it. And also the victim mentality is also a pattern. So these are just patterns that are revealing themselves to be to be looked at, to be honored, to be witnessed, to be observed, and to be respected. Because everyone in our society is having these experiences. It's not like there's a few of us. Clearly, the narcissistic personality is a problem, you know? And so we need to look at our own level of narcissistic personality and be willing to admit that to ourselves because it's showing up on either end of the spectrum as the victim or the villain, right? And then there's the rescuer. So the rescuer narcissist comes in and says, I'm going to save you because I know what you need. Well, you know what? That doesn't serve the other person. What that does is that enables the other person to stay and remain a victim, and it enables the villain to stay the villain, right? So it's just another part of that dysfunctional dynamic playing itself out. So until we're willing to let go of those dynamics, or those dysfunctional dynamics of victim, villain, rescuer, which plays into the narcissism and the alcoholism and the drug addiction and the food addiction and the sex addiction and the money addiction and the narcissistic addiction, until we're willing to look at the narcissistic addiction in ourselves, we will not be able to recognize how to support someone else within that frequency. If we're not willing to step out of the frequency ourselves and break through that frequency fence, then we can't help anybody else. And we'll just continue to enable them to be narcissistic because we're battling them rather than honoring their experience and honoring our own experience. So we're both having an experience, right? And now more than ever before in society, we're seeing narcissistic personalities popping up everywhere. Everybody's a narcissist, quite frankly. You know, the spiritual guru, for example, that's a narcissistic personality. So, you know, I go through this personal battle of like, how much am I willing to say? How much am I willing to put out there as a, you know, how much am I willing to be a leader, you know? Because I don't want to get pinned as, you know, the energy harvesting spiritual guru or the narcissistic personality, because I have been a narcissist and I know how painful it is to step out of that and to do the work and to be willing to take personal responsibility for my own narcissistic tendencies and the elitist tendencies that I was programmed as a child with, and being able to then stay and own my true power, right? And be in my full power and own that shit when someone's projecting their shit all over me, and be like, no, actually, this is how I feel. I honor that you're having your experience, brother, sister, and this is my experience. And I love you, you know? And not battling the narcissist or that personality trait or the demonic presence or whatever that is that's interdimensionally moving through that person in that moment. Right? Because there, a lot of times people are actually not fully embodied when those things are happening, and they're not aware, consciously aware of their actions. So that's the other deep root cause of this dynamic, is that, you know, interdimensional hosting that's taking place. And so a lot of people don't want to hear about that. But it's literally rampant in our collective. I mean, it's happening everywhere all the time. So we need to be able to be completely 100% willing to look at all the factors. We can't always say that this is a self-created dynamic. Because, like I said before, in order for me to survive, I had to become narcissistic. And in living in Los Angeles, I became even more narcissistic. Because it's a place that literally brews it into existence. I mean, it literally, like, it's a hotbed for it, you know? And so, you know, living in Los Angeles for 20 years, I really got to see how I participated in my own narcissistic dynamics. And when I stepped out of Los Angeles into another world, I was like, whoa, you know, like everything changed for me, because I realized I wasn't the center of my own universe anymore. And I had a kid too. So it was like, you know, and I was being victimized by, you know, people in that situation. So another narcissist. So it's like two narcissists, in fact. So it was like, I had an opportunity to see it from all these different angles, and to realize that that projection of me being a narcissist from the narcissists was something that wasn't, just realized today that that's not being talked about, you know? And the fact that we all have narcissistic tendencies, right? And so it's really important for us to look at those narcissistic tendencies within ourselves, to recognize them, to understand them in ourselves, to be able to unravel them in ourselves and take responsibility for them, and to stop that addiction and that behavior within ourselves. And so then when we see it and recognize it in someone else, we can have compassion for them, and we don't have to tolerate it, you know, and we don't have to agree with what they're saying. And, you know, like, so when somebody gaslights us, we don't have to take it on, quite frankly. And it's energetic too. The other aspect of this, I'm repeating myself over and over again, but energetically speaking, I think what's happening is I'm resisting speaking the truth to what is really going on an energetic level, because I feel like that's another conversation. So I'm going to save that. But just to say that everything is energetic, right? And so these energies are playing themselves out, and as they play themselves out in our reality, we get to look at the charges that are being created by these dynamics, and we can literally diffuse them and dismantle them quickly if we know the tools to be able to do that. And that's energetic responsibility 101. And so actually I'm developing a course. I've been developing a course for 5 years around this stuff, because it's like, it's not being talked about in a way that we can practically apply tools to get ourselves out of the mind control programs, of the programming of society, of the dynamics that play themselves out within our family of origin with the dysfunctional victim, villain, rescuer dynamics. There's so many ways that this shows up in our reality as a society that we need to look at. And that if we have those tools available to us, and we have a sphere around us, and we know what that looks like, and we know what our energy bubble is, and we know how we're taking personal responsibility for that bubble, and how we're affecting others in our thought forms, in our words, in our projections or not, it gives us the opportunity to heal as a collective, because the more people that do this work, the more we can value ourselves and value each other. You know, and the core value is, for me, is that everybody have a place to sleep at night, and everybody have meals to eat and food to eat, and that everyone feels safe, energetically safe. So that core energetic safety thing has been the focus of the last 10 years of my life, is really understanding how I can become energetically safe within myself, and I can be energetically safe for others, so that I'm not contributing to someone feeling unsafe, you know. And it's happened. Like, it happens all the time. People feel unsafe and get triggered by me all the time. And, you know, I may react in the moment, but I'm also willing to look at it, you know. And if we're willing to look at what it is that's causing this the discomfort in someone else, then we're really being willing to look at our own shit. And that makes a difference energetically in the collective, for real. It really does, because each one of us has a sphere of influence of at least 1,000 people or more. Some of us have more, some of us have less, but we're all affecting each other, you know. And so if we can really see that, then we start taking more personal responsibility for our life stream. And we slowly and surely embody more and more into this body, instead of being checked out and like allowing other things to move through us that may be narcissistic personality traits. So with that, I am feeling like I just keep repeating myself over and over again. There's going to be obviously a part 2 to this, where I talk about the energetic dynamics that play themselves out within the collective from interdimensional reality. So I will talk to that in a different video, because I think I need to put a little bit more focus on that and be willing to speak to that. And right now I'm not. In this moment, I am not willing to speak to that 100%. So thank you for being with me today. Please feel free to share this if you feel like it's, you know, information that other people might want or appreciate or glean from. And also, I have space right now for sessions with people. If you feel called to or curious about working with me, I'm happy to, you know, I'm happy to work with people right now. I have some space and time. So part 2 coming around this this dynamic and the core root causes of narcissism, because I do feel it's something that's a hotbed topic right now that we really need to speak about. We need to start having conversations about these dynamics that are playing themselves out in our society, and being willing to be part of the collective solution of it, rather than just our own personal healing process. It's bigger than that. And so, having been a narcissist myself, having had to be narcissistic to survive in the world that I grew up in and that I lived in, I have looked at the ins and outs of those dynamics and those personality traits, and I'm super willing to look at them. And I think that the more we look at how it plays itself out in our own personal reality, we'll be able to have compassion for others. So thank you so much for being here with me. And if you didn't get a chance or you're just joining now, I invite you to watch the whole video. There's a lot there. I talked for quite a while. And also I did a prayer earlier today for the earth changes and calling all the guardians of Gaia. So if you're interested in watching that too. Love you guys. Blessings to all of you. Thanks for joining me. Bye.